Good morning. Today is the 6th day of Nisan, the month about which the sages say in the Talmud and Masechet Brachot, if a person sees Nisan, he sees like a calendar with the name of the month, or he sees the name of the month, he should know the great miracles will be done to him. And we were all privileged to witness a real miracle last night, one that defies any kind of statistical explanation, and was just, you could just see it. It was something that was so clear, so bright, and we should all be giving thanks to God for saving us from those who mean us harm, who only have evil in their hearts. And we've really seen miracles, and we should see more of them. Most importantly, we should be able to give thanks for the good things in our lives. That's the main thing that miracles teach us. Every person has had a miracle happen to him at some point in life. It doesn't happen all the time, but when it happens and the person is moved by it and changed by it, the change should be that they should from now on feel that they're always in God's hands. That's the main moral of experiencing a miracle. To feel that I'm always protected, I'm always with God. And even in those situations in which I feel that perhaps the outcome is not the outcome that I want, I should know that I'm still protected by God, and still things will get better. And they will get better if I continue to foster my relationship, to build my relationship with God. I will merit to be able to see more miracles happen. Okay, we're now opening a very interesting Parsha, Torah portion, called Metzora. Metzora is the person who has been afflicted by Tzara'at, which again is translated as leprosy, but has nothing to do with the modern day leprosy. It is a physical disease whose onset is caused by spiritual problems in the person himself. And specifically, this is very relevant to us today, because the type of problems, and we began to talk about them last week, are problems that have to do with a person's pride, with the self-exoneration that we said has to do with the white color, and criticism of others, despite one's exonerating himself. What we want to look at today is a very interesting point, which is that Onkelos. We've talked about Onkelos in the past. Onkelos was apparently a Greek, or at least a Hellenist convert to Judaism in the 1st century CE. He was a great scholar. He became a great scholar. He was a great scholar before he came to Judaism, and he only increased his scholarship. And he wrote the first translation of the Torah into Aramaic. And we've talked in the past about the special relationship that Hebrew and Aramaic have. They're both Semitic languages. Now what we want to see is that Onkelos translates the word Tzara'at in a very interesting way. It's right away, the first time we see it, in Leviticus 13:2. He calls it Segiru. Segiru literally means closure. And this is very surprising in a certain sense, because we said that Tzara'at seems to mean exactly the opposite, because we said that the sages had identified the blemish with an overly open sense of self, meaning that the person is expressing himself through negative speech about others and defaming them and so on. So it seems to be exactly the opposite of being in a closed state, hindered state, one in which a person is not able to express themselves. So we need to understand why is it that Onkelos uses this word segiru, which again means someone who is closed up, who's clammed up. So we can understand the closure a little bit differently, not talking about the external manifestation of the person's illness, which is that he was speaking ill of others and so on, very loquacious, but rather we'll look at it as a closure in the deeper elements of the psyche. And so we're going to have to look at the person's mind, his heart and mind, and not just at his actions. meaning we're not going to look at it just behaviorally, we're going to look at it psychologically. Now, evil speech itself causes blockage and dullness in a person's heart and mind. When a person speaks idle and negative words, he adopts a negative mindset. And there's a psychological process that feeds itself and shutters him, closes him up to being able to change, meaning in a certain sense he's calcified. That's what evil speech and idle speech do to us. The mechanism behind this involves, among other things, the connection between speech and the mind. And just as the blood circulates through the body, so there is a spiritual cycle that circulates between speech and thought. When a person utters idle words, they return as empty and idle thoughts to his head, which feeds a spirit of folly, which is the spirit of sin, which then reappears outwardly in the form of more idle and cynical speech, and so forth in a vicious cycle. Now, the idea that the mind and speech are connected, meaning our thoughts and our speech, and that they form a type of cycle, is famously explained, I don't know if we've done it here, but certainly in our course called Understanding the Ego, we talk about it in length, in the letter Hey. The letter Hey, which has a roof and a right foot, and then the left foot is detached from the ceiling, from the horizontal line on top. The horizontal line and the vertical line that are connected are associated in Hasidic thought with thought in speech. And the disconnected portion of the Hey, the letter Hey, is associated with action. And so thought and speech are connected. They form like a little cycle, a circle that constantly feeds into itself. So we can use the understanding of this psychological mechanism to better comprehend how negative openness demonstrated by the individual's unrestrained ill speech creates a negative framework that seals the person, closes them off, and captures them within themselves. This causal sequence can be seen not only as a punishment or damage, but as a simple defense mechanism. When a person unbridles his spirit and does not restrain it, this negative openness will cause the psyche to close within itself, so that its essence will not be lost and carried away in a rush of negative openness. And that's why we call it a defense mechanism. It's like that the psyche knows that it has to protect the inner core. Because if I'm just gushing with negative statements, that becomes a risk for me of my true essence escaping and leaving me and becoming open to everyone to see. And in that way, it's completely blemished by the outside. And so, in order to prevent that, the psyche has to close the person and not allow anyone to see inside. It's almost like saying, and I think everybody's familiar with this, that the people who are full of gossip and full of negative things to say about others are the people that will never let you see them. Meaning they're always constantly on the defensive. They can never act honestly. They can never act openly. And they become unable of changing because of that. Because they can't hear anyone else. They're so busy spouting out the poison that they can't hear anything good. And it's very, very hard to affect them. It's very hard to move them to a different place, to get them to a better place. We don't have time to discuss all the meanings of closure here. There's so many. The article that will show up on Patreon, patreon.com/Galeinai, Galeinai, will be very long, quite long. I don't know if we'll even be able to fit all of it into the Wonders magazine, but I recommend reading it because there's so many ideas here that have to do with closure, the way that Onkelos translates Tzara'at, this disease, into Aramaic. But let's do one more point, which is very important. It's the notion of how the Tzara'at is healed. Before the whole healing process starts, there's something that the priest has to do. So let's read about this and see why this is connected to closure as well. So the notion that Tzara'at is related to closure in the psyche appears once again when we consider the healing process prescribed by the Torah. The healing of Tzara'at is not a natural human process, just as much as the disease itself is not natural and it's not dictated by human beings. It's rather something psychological. But a divine healing that is facilitated by a Kohen. The priest is facilitating a divine form of healing. And we've talked about this in the past, as described elsewhere. God heals by a process that the sages call like with like, domeh b'domeh, which is why the healing process that the Metzora, the person who is afflicted with Tzara'at, undergoes begins with, and the priest shall isolate him. And we saw this throughout the previous parsha, that beginning with Leviticus 13:5, the person who's afflicted has to be isolated from everyone. So he's closed off. In fact, the words for isolate, v'hisgiro hakohen, hisgiro and closure, sgiru, stem from the same exact root. The isolation of the Metzora, the person afflicted by Tzara'at, is in an intermediate state between the beginning of the disease, in which he is still considered pure, and the complete impurity of the definitive Metzora, the person who's been completely diagnosed with Metzora, with Tzara'at. Still, it is a method used by the Kohen to attempt to heal the one who is afflicted by closure with closure, curing like with like we just said. Moreover, the act of isolation assumed that if it is the Kohen that isolates the Metzora, then later when the time comes, it is also the Kohen, the priest, who will be able to release him from his isolation and from his state of spiritual closure. So we've seen today, again, only very partial about this, and this is the topic of the first half of our parsha this week. What is the process of healing? How do you heal from this affliction? Meaning, in last week's parsha we talked about the diagnosis and the state of being in Tzara'at. In this week's parsha we're going to be dealing, at least in the first half, with everything that has to do with healing from it, which is a very special process. Again, it's not like healing from any kind of physical ailment that a person might have. It's a completely spiritual type of healing. And we'll look more and more in depth as the week goes on into the details and the particulars of this process. So thank you for joining me today. I hope to see you with more revealed miracles and more good news in the continuation of this week of Parashat Metzora.